Greetings everyone, it's Jeremy Sutton here from PrecisionPrinciple.com, and today I'm on day 6 of the intensive Ashtanga yoga teacher training. Now, I really enjoyed the philosophical classes we had today because we really got to the heart of the matter. We finally arrived at Ashtanga yoga, the philosophy of Ashtanga. And in particular, what does Ashtanga mean? Well, broken down, Ashtanga means 8 limbs. So students of yoga will be familiar with this. This is the 8 limbs of yoga. All right. Now, the 8 limbs of yoga are a really practical and helpful way to look at the world because they break down sort of 8 circles, 8 levels where we can interact with the world. And so the first one starts with the furthest external part of the world, the environment and our social community. Second one moves into our relationship to our self, then to our body, then it keeps going further into our breath. Then the 5th is the turning in of the mental of the senses. Then we have the psychological aspects, the intellectual aspects, and eventually the spiritual aspects, which in this case spiritual means self-realization, or learning to see ourselves as we really are, as the Dalai Lama put it. So, in particular, the 4th, 1 to 4, pertain to the external world. The 5th is the turning in, and 6, 7, 8 all pertain to our mental and psychological, spiritual self faculties. And this is an important distinction in a lot of philosophy, because basically, if you're studying philosophy, and even in science, there's a major switch between the external objective universe and the internal subjective universe. All right. So, in scientific terms, we have, for example, quantitative studies. These are hard, measurable studies that we can conduct. The studies of physics are all quantitative. And then on the inside, on the subjective side, we have qualitative studies. Things that measure perhaps, how much do you like this? And I might say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I like it 4. But how do I know that my 4 is your 4? Well, we don't, because these are just subjectivity. We don't really have a hard, guaranteed, this is the same for me, the same for you, because it's on the interior world. It's on the part of experience. Now, today, we talked about the first 3 of the 8 limbs. And so these 3 all pertain to the external reality, all right? So the first one is yamas, our yamas. And this is basically our relationship to the environment and to other people in the environment. And so the first sort of sub-point for the first branch of yoga is ahimsa. Now, ahimsa means non-violence. And of course that means non-violence on the physical side, don't harm others. It might even mean, in the Buddhist sense, it might mean, don't harm animals, maybe be vegetarian, although the yogic tradition doesn't require any sort of vegetarian or veganism. In fact, there are no rituals at all in this tradition, so it's completely secular. These are more like guidelines or ways to help you achieve a goal, and that goal is enlightenment. In the case of this philosophy. So this is more like, this is the way to get what you want. These are very practical, useful steps. All right. So as we mentioned, this first subpoint of the first limb is ahimsa. And ahimsa is non-violence, so non-physical violence, but also non-violence of the mind, in the sense that, when someone cuts you off on the road, how do you react? Do you think, oh man, I just would love, if I could just get my hands on that guy or girl or whatever the situation is? Do you have peacefulness all the way to the clarity of mind? And can you cultivate peaceful thoughts, generally speaking? The next point is satya, and that is truthfulness. And that one pretty much speaks for itself, except that here, this is really about being truthful all the time. So for example, compared to Buddhism, Buddhist right speech, for example, there is a difference here, because they're said to be in Buddhism 3 guardians. So whenever we need to we're going to say something, there are essentially three gates that we need to pass through before we should speak. And the first one is it true? Is what I'm saying just factually truthful, honest? Is it actual reality? Number two is it harmful or beneficial? And I can only pass this gate if it's beneficial. And the third one is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? And so the third gate is only passable if it is actually pleasant. Now, I don't know if this is all Buddhism that believes this, but essentially the difference is here in yoga, this satya, this truthfulness, is that it doesn't matter if it's beneficial or not beneficial. The truth is the truth, and we should speak the truth no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's pleasant or unpleasant. We are to speak the truth no matter what, following this line of philosophy. The next one we talked about previously, and that is non-stealing. And again, that's not only non-stealing of physical items, but it's also non-stealing of intellectual property, like plagiarism, and also in the sense of not taking credit for things that we didn't do. So I mentioned earlier, it's like, the example in class was that Brazilians might take pride that Brazil has won 4 World Cups, but point is, why are you proud of that if you've never touched the ball, if you didn't kick that ball? That's sort of stealing the pride, stealing the victory for something that we didn't have part of. Another example is our political party might win, our sports team might win, maybe my country is good at something. In America, we tend to be very excited about the Olympics, and we feel like we won so many gold medals, and it just proves that we're number one. As Americans, we tend to have this thought that we are number one, and this is actually a very American thought. Other people from other countries don't necessarily have this idea kind of drilled into them so thoroughly. And next one, brahmacharya, I think it's pronounced. And in the very, very narrow sense, sometimes this is considered to be celibacy, but this is not completely correct. The more accurate way to consider this topic is moderation in sexual and sensual pleasures. That is, if we just, give in to our sexual urges, and we can, at any given moment, we can basically run ourselves down a path that is just constantly chasing experiences. There's often a drug analogy about chasing the dragon, just trying to touch that dragon, and as soon as you touch it, it flies off a little bit farther, and you touch it again, and it flies off a little bit farther, and pretty soon you're just running as hard as you can, trying to get that dragon, and you're so narrow-mindedly focused on just to get to that thing that you look around you and you don't even realize where you've been. In your focus on the dragon, you just trampled a whole garden of flowers, or you may have run yourself into a dangerous place because you weren't paying attention to what's around you. You were just chasing that experience, that thrill. And so, in this sense, the brahmacharya is moderation in sensual and sexual pleasures, and it doesn't have to be just sex, though. It's moderation in what floats your boat. Is it food? Is it gluttony? Or is it drugs? Is it sex? It doesn't really matter. We need to show moderation in these things, because if we chase them too thoroughly, then it's going to lead us astray. And it's basically going to just take us off the path towards enlightenment, following this philosophical tradition. And maybe even if we're not seeking enlightenment, it's just good advice, because these are the types of things that can get us into trouble if we're not paying attention. And so this is the first limb, the yamas. All right, and notice how they basically pertain to this social world, the social and environmental world, the exterior. All right. The second one is the niyamas, and so now we're moving one closer. And basically, it's what do I think of myself? This is the personal realm. How do I deal with myself? Included in this is hygiene, and again we have, of course, the physical hygiene, the external hygiene, but then also we're talking about the internal thoughts as well. And in emotions. Do I just keep track of my emotions, my thoughts, and do I not let them dirty my mind, so to speak, in a symbolic sense? And probably this is the most important one, and it's called, the pronunciation is difficult, but maybe santosha. And santosha, more specifically, is contentment. Now, we might understand contentment by comparing it to satisfaction. And satisfaction happens when I want something and then I get it. And I get it, while I have it, I'm satisfied. But contentment is more profound, more lasting, and just superior. Contentment is a mental attitude to be content, happy, satisfied with the situation that I'm in, regardless of what that is. Now, there's a danger here in that sometimes contentment can be thought of as laziness. The classic example is, a student. Maybe there's a kid, and the kid gets a 70 on the test, and the mom says, or dad says, "Oh, you gotta get 80% or 90% even, right? So you gotta stop being lazy. You gotta just study a little bit harder, work a little bit harder, and you gotta get that better grade." And the kid might think, well, you know what? I'm actually quite content with this 70. The 70 passes my internal standard for what's good. And so yeah, this is essentially, in one sense, this contentment is the epitome of happiness. It's the decision to be all right, to be happy, to be in a good mood, regardless of what's going on around me, to not be so subject to the external environment. So that's the next point. The next one is tapa, and this is sometimes known as austerity, but it's also self-discipline, right? So here with tapas, we get activities such as fasting. Maybe some people will fast once a week simply to withhold their senses because it's difficult. It's about cultivating willpower. It's about cultivating self-discipline. And obviously, we can see how in an arduous yoga practice such as Ashtanga, which is quite difficult. My body is attesting to that. It's difficult to stick with it. But when we go back to it, day in, day out, get back on the horse, so to speak, and just really get into it, we cultivate this self-discipline and willpower that will help us in a number of areas in life. And in particular, all of these are trying to help prepare the body, prepare the mind for meditation. So, of course, meditation is one of the most difficult things in the world. It's the simplest, hardest thing in the world. It's simple because all you have to do is sit there, watch your breath, and difficult because quickly we tend to find out that a lot of chatter is going on. It's not so easy to sit there quietly. We want to get up. We want to do this or that. So obviously, this willpower and this discipline is going to come in handy when trying to reach such a lofty goal such as enlightenment. But obviously, there are also other benefits for cultivating self-discipline. Now, the next one is, Swadhyaya. I don't know, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But in English, that means self-study. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are studying yourself, but what you are doing is studying what it means to be a self, studying the idea of self, maybe in a course of yoga, for example, or maybe looking more deeply into psychology. I would very highly recommend a number of books in psychology, including Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. For people who don't mind a little bit denser text, I would recommend Robert Keegan's The Evolving Self. Ken Wilber has a little bit lighter and pretty comprehensive look into psychology in A Theory of Everything, and also Integral Psychology and No Boundary. And another one is, I can't remember his name, Dr. Ratty, I think, Ratte, in A User's Guide to the Brain, are all excellent kind of entry points into this self-study for anybody who's interested. And the reason that these studies are so helpful in this path is because the goal is ultimately self-realization, is this whole yogic path. So if we don't understand at all what the fundamentals of self are, self-development, psychological development, what are the changes that I can expect my mind to go through at time? That reminds me, the great courses, Your Deceptive Mind, another absolute piece of gold as far as studying the psyche, and also on the great courses, the Great Ideas of Psychology is another one. But essentially, if I kind of understand what's going on in the mind, and I sort of see the path as it's laid out before me, then I'm more likely to be able to move along it at a healthy, comfortable rate, not too fast to get ahead of myself and not too slow to kind of delay my advancement. So self-study, the practice of self-study and learning about what it means to be a psyche, to be a self, to be an ego, to be an I, this is the last part of the niyamas. And then we move to the asanas. That's the third branch of the yoga, and this is basically what the majority of the Western world think yoga is all about. Asana is about the body postures, all right? And if we're going to a gym and practicing yoga, then it's more close to a gymnastics class than it is to a classical, traditional yoga class. And that is to say that the physical benefits are there. And there are definitely going to be great benefits for practicing yoga, even on just the physical realm. I mean, it's got therapeutic value, it's got strength training value, flexibility. It's just going to be good for you. But it's worth noting that in the Yoga Sutras, the 195 fundamental lines that make up the heart of the foundation of the yogic philosophy, written by Patanjali 2,500 years ago, out of 195 sutras, only 3 of them are dedicated to the asanas, to the physical body practice. So it's basically worth noting that if anybody who's serious in actual self-discovery or in a more profound experience of yoga, that only about 1.5% of yoga deals with this physical body, right? But that being said, the 3 sutras that Patanjali does give is a pretty excellent orientation about how we should practice this yoga. And essentially, let me see if I'm getting this right, is that the first one about these is how to do the asanas. And that is basically, in English, the English translation is a posture that is stable and comfortable. So any posture that is both stable and comfortable is an asana. And comfortable is a loose word, especially if you consider the physical practice of Ashtanga yoga, which is quite difficult. I mean, even what's known as the primary series has any number of twists and turns where you're moving elbows underneath the knees and this and that, which, at least for me, I don't know if comfortable is the first word I would use to describe them. But that being said, sitting in a chair is an asana if you are stable and comfortable. Standing in line is an asana if you are stable and comfortable. So that is the first of the Yoga Sutras, how to do asana, the asana practice. And in general, here when we are stable and comfortable, this is where we cultivate awareness, and also we might think about the speed at which we do things. Now, this is a big point of focus for me, or at least it should be, because it is said that there is an inverse relationship between the speed at which we do something and the awareness with which we do it. More succinctly, that is, the slower we do something, the greater awareness we're bringing to that activity. Now, of course, I'm a very fast talker. A lot of the time, my brain is going at 1,000,000 miles a minute. So this is pretty good advice for me to take, that we have to slow down, do things with greater awareness, and that is part of this sutra. Next one is slackening the effort. Slackening the effort. Now, what this means is that we need to be, while we're doing the asana practice, we should be graceful and efficient. That is, we want to use enough energy and force to do the posture, to do the movement as it's supposed to be done, but we don't want to do any more than that. That is, we want to be as efficient as possible with the level of energy that we put into that, and if we can, at first, we're definitely going to have to use more energy than that, because we're not masters, we're not efficient enough. So we have to, really work to get into it. But if we really want to do it properly in the sense of the enlightenment, we need to use exactly enough pressure to do an effort to do the work. And on this topic, there's a great book called Strength to Awaken by Robert McNamara, And in this, he talks about using strength training as a physical practice for waking up, for self-realization, for getting past the ego. And he calls strength training the yoga of the West. So in this book, he's basically applying the principles of yoga to the activity of strength training. And he makes a great point in that, when we first start an exercise routine, at first we just need to figure out the fundamental mechanics of the motions. We might want to use a very light set of weights and just really lock in the fundamental movements so that we can get efficiency in that. And it's not till later, till we start to gain mastery in the different lifts, to become very comfortable, to become knowledgeable of them, and practice so that we have awareness of how well we're doing this and what the correct way to do it is, that we can then use just precisely enough energy to lift the weight without any more or any less. So we're just using that, toning in our work precisely to what's required in this situation. And this has ramifications beyond just yoga. I mean, we might have a project at work or school, and the question is, how much energy do I put into this project to get it done just right? And I know I was certainly my mistake in a lot of classes I've taken to just do complete overkill, put in sometimes 2 or 3 times more energy than I needed to get the grade, and getting back the grade 100%. And of course, if you're going to get 100% if you do twice as much work as is required. But is it always worth it? If it's a simple assignment, do you want to spend an hour on it when it should only take 10 minutes? That's not a very efficient use of your energy. So, this is beyond life. You want to use just enough energy to get the job done. But before we attain mastery, we do have to probably use more energy because we don't know where that level is. So until we find that, we're going to have to use more. So, and the third aspect, the third sutra that deals with the asanas is, what are the effects? What are the effects of performing the asanas correctly? And it is argued that if you perform the asanas correctly, then basically all the conflicts in your life will start to dissolve away. That's not to say that you won't have any more problems. That's not what's being said. What's being said is the conflict will be dissolved when we do the asanas correctly. And I think here it's because these are the practices that help you get over yourself. And so the conflict is like suffering. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Well, problems are inevitable, but the conflict, the struggle, the tension in there, that is the optional part of this. Right? So, and that is essentially the heart of what we covered today. But there's one more point that I'd like to end on, and that's the point of yoga is transformation. Now, let's consider transformation juxtaposed to change. Let's for example, let's say I have something that's A and B, and A can turn into B, but also B can turn into A. See, that's change, when something can change from one into the other, but then it can also change back. But transformation is more like metamorphosis. That's when A can turn to B, and there's no going back. This is like when the caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. And that's what we're doing here, what we're talking about with yoga. So we're not talking about, starting a workout routine and then going back to quit. Oh, I did it for about a month and then I let off. I think we've all, got gym memberships or, that home video workout series or something that we started. We thought we were going to be really into it when we first started. We changed for a little bit, but then we ended up changing back into whatever we were doing before it started. But that's not the purpose of yoga. The purpose of yoga is transformation. And so, sort of to establish this transformation, we need 3 principles. And the first principle is that the practice needs to be prolonged. That is, it's more about duration than it is repetitions. All right, so that's the first one. The second one is it has to be without breaks. That is, we don't miss a workout. We don't miss the opportunity to get the job done. And the third one is with full faith. We have to do the work with the faith that we know the transformation is going to occur if we just stick with it long enough. This is the same with the diet, this is the same with exercise, it could be strength training, it could be yoga, it could be meditation, but we have to enter it with the faith that this work is going to yield some results, whether or not it's the ones that we were hoping for. And so that essentially is what we covered today. And tomorrow we will cover the rest of the 8 limbs of yoga. And so I look forward to sharing that with you then. If you're enjoying this video series, I would encourage you to subscribe below. But in the meantime, keep learning, keep growing, and have a great day.